What is going on, moto friends? In front of me I have the Ducati Streetfighter V4S, a motorcycle with over 1000 cc engine displacement. And ever since leader bikes have been in production, people have been arguing about whether or not these motorcycles are good for the street or not. Well, today I'm going to answer that question, and not just using some anecdotes and personal stories. I'm going to show you some real-life riding examples of why these motorcycles can be so fun and also so dangerous. So let me just make sure I don't get hit by a car here, and let's get into it. Now, I'm going to be talking specifically about super sports and hypernakeds because someone in the comments is eventually going to say, oh, well, I ride a 1200cc cruiser or a 1200cc ADV motorcycle. But those motorcycles are different than a super sport and a hypernaked in both ergonomics and how the engines are tuned. So when you're talking about leader bikes, we're going to be talking about sport bikes in specific. So I'm going to have this in sport mode because obviously all of these ride-by-wire motorcycles now, you can tune down the engine strength, you can use a rain mode, you can use a road mode, but they're meant to be ridden in sport mode, so that's what I'm going to show you. So let's get this bike started and show you some examples.
Now the first exercise we're going to do is I'm going to let out the clutch and just show you what the engine will naturally do when it's idling. So let me know your guesses. How fast do you think this motorcycle will go when I let out the clutch and just don't give it any throttle? Let's try to do this without stalling. And here we go. We're off. We're going. Zero throttle. We're going about 9 miles an hour. Now, is that quicker or slower than you expected? Initially, when I tried this little experiment, I thought it would go a little faster than 9 miles an hour, but here we are. You don't really feel any of this power. It's barely going. I mean, it's chugging along, so I'm going to pull the clutch in, pull over. There's a little car coming. So, you know, when you're riding with just the engine without any throttle, it's not a scary motorcycle. It's just idling along. It's probably going the same speed as my 310cc BMW that I started on. So now let's just give it the bare minimum throttle to keep this engine from lugging and see how fast it's going to go at that point. And then we're going to build up, and I'm just going to show you what the point of this exercise is. So again, we're going to let out the clutch slowly, and again, this is a great exercise to practice your clutch control. So there it is, chugging along at 9, and you can see my hands here. I'm just going to use a few fingers so you can see, and just giving it a little bit of gas. It's no longer lugging at about 13, 14 miles an hour. And just look at how little throttle I'm giving this thing, right? It's just so incredibly sensitive. So you let go, it goes back down to idling range, but very, very, very little throttle. So now that brings me to my point of why I'm doing this. If you're riding a 1000cc motorcycle, the throttle is incredibly twitchy and incredibly responsive. So the issues you can run into are really about your throttle control. So I'm going to do a little bit of a U-turn here, and then I'm just going to show you what this motorcycle looks like when you're just giving it the bare minimum throttle to accelerate and just how quickly you can get into trouble. So here we are. All right, this is a very narrow street, so I don't think I can swing this in one maneuver, unfortunately. This bike's turn radius is very, very small. That's one of my big issues here, but then again, it's not meant to be doing U-turns on narrow little roads. So there we go, not in the grass. All right, same thing here, letting out the clutch, lugging along, giving it barely any throttle. Show you just how little throttle it takes to accelerate this motorcycle. Do you see my hands move at all, my wrists move? Even now, look at this thing. I'm barely touching. Barely going. So we're almost hitting 60 doing that. So this is the whole point with the super sports and the hypernaked motorcycles that are tuned for very high horsepower performance. The throttles are incredibly twitchy, incredibly responsive. Now we're just going to keep our ride going, and I'll talk while I show you some stuff. So that's kind of one of the tricky things that people, when they get a 1000cc, they can handle it in low speeds, but then when you can really get yourself into trouble when you're giving this bike too much throttle and accelerating. So I'll give you a little example here in first gear. Look at my wrist here. I mean, you can really quickly get yourself in trouble on these motorcycles. And around turns especially, you have to be really careful with how much throttle you're giving this thing. So you think, oh, you know, I can start on a 1000cc bike. I have, 6 months of experience. Let me get a leader bike. It's really not that easy. And these motorcycles, they're not like a cruiser or an adventure motorcycle where you can just kind of sit there and turn your mind off. look around the beautiful scenery. I mean, look how gorgeous it is out today. It's perfect fall weather. We've got the sun about to set out there. We've got some trees changing colors. And you just want to relax sometimes and ride your motorcycle. These super sports and hypernakeds are not built for that. You have to be constantly vigilant of what you're doing. You constantly have to be thinking about your throttle hand. So really, that's not for everyone. When I want to go on a relaxed ride with a friend, when I want to listen to some music, I hop on my Tiger 1200 adventure motorcycle and just relax. And it's wonderful. The seating is more upright. This Streetfighter V4S is really a Panigale without fairings. And you can check it out. You can see how far lean forward this motorcycle is compared to some of the other naked bikes that I've been on. Before this, I had a Monster, and that motorcycle was actually a lot more comfortable than this. It was more upright. I wasn't leaning on the handlebars as much. Here, your feet are fairly far back compared to other naked bikes. And I sat on some Yamaha MT series, the Super Duke even. The S1000RR is similar in terms of how much lean forward you are on your arms, but this is basically a sport bike. So I'm going to turn off here. See if I can swing this wide turn and see again very low throttle input. You can see what I'm doing here on this turn. And if you're less experienced, haven't been riding so much, you can really yank on that throttle and spin your back wheel out during a turn. So wouldn't be good. So, again, you cannot shut your brain off when you're riding these motorcycles just because of the horsepower and the torque, especially at the higher RPMs. Now, another issue is the seating position in terms of how you will control your motorcycle. And as I said, this is a little more lean forward, your pressure is on your arms, so you really have to be hugging the tank with your knees, scoot your ass back onto the little bolster, and stay off of the tank. Of course, you could sit on the tank and ride with your arms up, but you really risk upsetting your suspension. So the key is to always be riding with really loose arms, loose elbows. You don't want to be locking your elbows because every bump in the road gets transmitted back into your arms and can upset the balance of this motorcycle and cause wobbles at higher speeds. So this motorcycle is not for everyone. And if you're talking about streetability, you're thinking about, is this motorcycle comfortable and is it competent at road speeds? Now, when I have this thing in road mode, the throttle response is a lot more tame, so it's perfectly fine to ride. And at 6,000 RPM or so, it drives really well, really smoothly. But when you're putting it in sport mode as it's intended, you know, below 6,000 RPM doesn't even exist on this motorcycle, really. It just kind of disappears. Let me show you. It's kind of a funny thing. So road mode, there you go. You see, you get your whole RPM all the way up to 6 here, and then it goes around up to the 15,000 red line, which again is crazy. But when you stick this thing into sports mode, close the throttle, it's like, all right, you don't need below 6,000 RPM in this, so you basically wants you to live at this speed, right? So at 8,000 RPM, so you're really close to the power band of this motorcycle. And you have to be paying close attention to your throttle, your inputs, and really it's exhausting if you're just trying to ride around the street and get from point A to point B. So I would say this is not for everyone, right? You don't want to be relaxed riding. You don't want to be shutting your brain off. This is something that can really get you into trouble really quickly. In terms of control in the other modes, rain mode, road mode, this is a perfectly fine street motorcycle, but you're really not utilizing anything near what it's intended to do, which I think everyone knows that buying a leader bike. And the purchase decision doesn't come just down to horsepower, how much you're going to be using. Part of it is like, you know, I have this leader bike, you have the horsepower if you need it, and it just looks cool, it's a wonderful machine, so I understand those arguments, but from a pure riding perspective, I guess I could have squeezed in there, but from a pure riding perspective, no one needs a 1000cc bike on the street. And that's really the whole point. It's all comes down to personal preference, but if you ride this with perfect focus and perfect attention, I don't think the horsepower, the displacement really matter too much. You just have to really work on your throttle and clutch control before getting on a motorcycle like this. But once you have that down, it's really no different than any other motorcycle at low RPMs. The only thing that's really scary is if you hit bumps and you don't have good control of your throttle hand. You hit a bump, you can really jerk that throttle and it jumps, you know? So if you're not an experienced rider, that kind of jump right there is frightening, and if you're not holding on properly, you can kind of go off the back of the bike. So again, it just takes a lot of practice and working on that really good clutch control and throttle control, which really all the instructive courses talk about. Got a little roundabout traffic circle coming up here. All right, we're past that little area of traffic, so I can actually focus on what I'm saying. I really don't like riding in slow-moving traffic with distracted drivers. So here we are. I can finally form some coherent thoughts. To the question of the video, is a 1000cc motorcycle streetable? I mean, of course it is, right? You just have to know what you're doing. The caveat is with these bikes, you really have to be paying complete attention at all times, or else you can get yourself into trouble. I mean, we got a little space here, but like, you know, it's so quick, the amount of speed these motorcycles can gain. So you just have to be super, super careful and super sensitive with the inputs and what you're doing. So buy yourself a 1000cc bike if you like, just ride it very carefully. And really, I'm not going to ramble on. That's the whole point of these videos. Just kind of do what you like, just be safe doing it. So thanks for watching this little mini moto vlog, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We're going to be doing some more fun stuff, obviously.